The origins of Sarah Fier's curse are finally revealed as history comes full circle on a night that changes the lives of Shadysiders forever. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve from VALHARTV, and today I'll be reviewing Fear Street Part 3. Now, the movie picks up right where we left off in Part 2, but it's 1666, and we meet Sarah Fier for the first time, the real Sarah Fier. She is one of the local girls in, I believe it's Union Village. And as we see the story progress, we see a bunch of teens of the village are getting ready to meet for, after nightfall for a party. They're out going to be partying, things like that. And we get to meet an old lady who's living on the outskirts of town that does medicine and things like that. And we find out she has the original book, and we really see where this is Sarah is kind of intrigued about what it is, but we are introduced really to a bunch of teens from part 1 and 2, which I thought was very weird, and it was a little hard to follow because I was like, most of these kids aren't even dead, and I'm like, from part 1 and 2, I'm like, wow, I'm like, this is kind of weird. And we're, again, like the old lady lives in the woods, and then Solomon Good. We are introduced to Solomon Good, who is one of the integral parts of the story. He's one of the main characters, I would say, in this. So the first half of the movie, we get to see how the village starts to react to food rotting and the pastor kind of going mad. So we meet the very first killer of Shadyside, and it's the pastor that is running the village, and I thought that was actually kind of cool. And just the way everybody wakes up after the party and things just really start to go kind of downhill, and food starting to rot and spoil, and it's really kind of cool. And it was really eerie too, because you could kind of feel almost and tell that the villagers were really getting scared and getting really anxious and to try to find, who the witch was. And they were just really running around just, in fear for their lives. And we really get to see this is where, if somebody doesn't like you, or if you embarrassed somebody like they did this one guy, people will just lie and be like, oh, it was that person. It was that person. Oh, and they'll go through. And that's exactly what they did to Sarah and her friend. I believe her name is Hannah in this. And they go through, and we end up seeing, Sarah is determined to try to prove their innocence at first, and then she goes to trying to run away, and then she's like, fine, they want a witch, I'll give them one. And that's where, it really gets, really gets even more eerie, was when the villagers are chasing her and trying to find her, and there's also a pretty big plot twist here too, that turns everything that we know upside down. Literally, you're like, wait, what? So we really get to see the truth of the matter and the heart of it. And I thought that was really good. And then the second half of the movie, we go back to 1994, where Dina, Josh, Ziggy, and Henry, adult Ziggy, I should say, and Henry now know the truth about the curse of Sarah Fier, and they set out to stop the curse and save Shadyside for good this time. They figure out what's going on and what they really kind of have to do. So I really kind of liked that as well. And the second half goes back to being a little goofy and leans into some of the more elaborate ideas of, the first movie and stuff, and as they kind of progressed along. But it really takes cue from Carrie in this. I really was like, wow, this is like, and they even reference Carrie in this movie. So I thought that was actually kind of cool because it's a throwback to part two. And it wraps the trilogy up, honestly, I think really well. And the mid-credit scene, I was like, why would you? I don't want to spoil it, but it was good. I mean, I'm sure most people have seen it because I've waited a couple of weeks to put this out. But yeah, this was really good. Like the ending credit scene, I didn't really kind of like how they kept doing it in between some of the credits and stuff. It was kind of a little jarring. They should have just either made it a full mid-credit scene or like Marvel does and things like that, or they should have just put it at the end and then did the credits. But it was still, I thought it was great. The sets were amazing in the first half of the movie. The village looked great, and the costumes and the village itself were basically right for the time period. So I really liked that. I thought it was really good. And the mall scene, I think, in the second half was pretty cool as well. Because of all like the fluorescent paint and the lights they used and the things they wrote, it really kind of reminded you of like almost like a laser tag type, situation. But then they did a Carrie in it, so I thought that was really good as well. The songs in it, I thought in the first half were better because they weren't overpowering. They didn't feel like they were kind of forced. Like even in the second half of this, you have a couple of songs that were just thrown in like real quick. That's what it kind of felt like to me. And it didn't really, match up. Like in the first one again too, they kept playing a bunch of songs like after the first part of the part one, in and out of the movie that just were like, you're just throwing them in there now just to try to get nostalgia going, again. But overall, I like the sound in this. The acting in this was just as believable, honestly, as part two. I actually really liked it. And the first half was definitely eerie. Like you felt like the kids were, like the teenagers were growing up and they were doing stuff they weren't really supposed to. So they were out in the woods trying to party, things like that, like teenagers are going to. I mean, I don't really know if that's what they did back, in those times, of course, but I mean, it felt like like a party. They were out there just drinking some, apple cider and, like hard apple cider, I'm sure, and some other stuff. And it was good, and then it was eerie, especially when they started having like all the problems and the pastor, he was mumbling stuff. And then what happened with the children, like, I'm pretty sure even from the very first movie, there were 12 murders in each of the movies, 12 bodies that they had. So I thought that was actually kind of cool too, because you see the origin of like that. And it's very interesting because it's only Shadysiders too that get that have the problem. So I thought that was very interesting on how that came about as well. Excuse me. So the Fear Street trilogy got off to a rocky start. I honestly, truly think that the first movie wasn't bad. It was okay, but it wasn't as good as the second or third part. But it came back in part two and part three. Part three was definitely a good wrap up to the whole trilogy, and the tone and style of part three was closer to part two, in that it was more consistent and flowed well from past to present. So I thought that was really good too. But overall, I honestly think the second movie was the best one. But I would still, like, this movie was really good too. I did like part three quite a bit. I would give it at least a 7.5 easily, to 8 out of 10. This was a good movie. This was a good ending. They actually did the ending pretty well. And the mid-credit scene I thought was really good. I was like, wow, it just kind of sets things up too again. So I really liked that as well. So overall, I would give this whole series at least a 7.5, 8 out of 10, just for the simple fact that you had the second and third movie that were really good. I, again, think the second movie was the best out of them all because it really had like the slasher vibe down. really well, and it reminded you, especially me, of like all the old slasher movies, like Friday the 13th, and other camping movies too. So I really liked that. Really thought it was great. And this movie too, eerie in the very first part of it, was really good, and it transitioned from present to past, back to present quite well with a nice wrap up. So I definitely enjoyed this series. If you guys like what I do, please hit the like button and subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about this series. Take care for now, everybody.